The bright lights of New York City illuminated the streets below as taxis honked and pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks. Inside a bustling television studio, cameras were being adjusted, microphones checked, and last-minute preparations, made for one of the most popular late-night talk shows in America. The energy in the room was electric, with crew members rushing around and guests waiting nervously backstage. Tonight's episode promised to be special, featuring none other than Chuck Norris, the legendary action star whose name had become synonymous with strength, discipline, and an almost mythical aura of invincibility. Chuck Norris wasn't just any guest, he was a cultural icon. From his days as a martial artist to his blockbuster movies and even internet memes that portrayed him as superhuman, he had earned a place in the hearts of millions. But tonight he wasn't here to talk about his latest movie or share wild stories from his stunt-filled career. Instead, he was promoting something deeply personal, a charity initiative aimed at supporting military families. Joining him on stage was his daughter, Emily Norris, a gentle and creative soul who had recently published her first novel. Her book, inspired by real-life struggles and triumphs, had already begun to gain attention for its heartfelt message and vivid storytelling. As the countdown to airtime began, the host of the show, Whoopi Goldberg, sat in her chair going over notes with her team. Known for her quick wit and sharp humor, Whoopi was famous for keeping her guests on their toes. She loved nothing more than teasing her interviewees, often poking fun at their quirks or quirks of their public personas. And tonight, she couldn't wait to see how Chuck would react to her playful jabs. After all, who wouldn't want to test the patience of someone rumored to have once stared down a grizzly bear? When the red light above the camera blinked on, signaling that the show was live, the audience erupted into applause. Whoopi greeted them warmly, flashing her trademark grin. "Good evening, everybody," she said, her voice booming through the studio. "We've got a fantastic show lined up for you tonight. First up, we have a man who needs no introduction, Chuck Norris." The crowd cheered wildly as Chuck walked onto the stage, wearing his signature cowboy hat and a warm smile. He waved to the audience before taking his seat beside Whoopi. A moment later, Emily joined him, looking elegant yet slightly nervous. She gave a small wave to the cheering crowd before sitting down next to her father. Whoopi leaned forward, clearly delighted to have such iconic guests. "Welcome, Chuck. Welcome, Emily," she said, shaking both their hands. "It's great to have you here." "Thanks for having us," Chuck replied, his deep voice carrying a sense of calm authority. Emily nodded shyly, glancing at the sea of faces watching from the audience. Whoopi wasted no time diving into the conversation. "So, Chuck," she began, leaning back in her chair with a mischievous twinkle in her eye, "you're not exactly known for doing fluffy interviews like this. What made you decide to come on my show?" Chuck chuckled softly. "Well, I figured if I'm going to promote something important, why not do it with someone as entertaining as you?" His response drew laughter from the audience, and Whoopi grinned, clearly pleased with the compliment. "Flattery will get you everywhere," she quipped. Turning to Emily, she added, "And speaking of important things, your dad tells me you've written a book. Tell us about that." Emily hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a soft but steady voice. "It's called Through the Storm. It's about finding hope and resilience when life gets tough. I wanted to write something that could inspire others who might be facing challenges." "That sounds amazing," Whoopi said, nodding approvingly. "I love seeing talented young women make their mark. But let me ask you this. How does it feel having Chuck Norris as your dad? Do people ever take you seriously? Or do they just assume everything you do is because of him?" Emily smiled politely. "It's definitely a mix. Some people are curious about what I'm doing because of my dad, but I think most understand that I'm trying to carve out my own path." Whoopi raised an eyebrow, pretending to look skeptical. Okay, sure. But come on, Chuck, you're notorious for being protective. Are you really letting her handle all this on her own, or are you secretly pulling strings behind the scenes?" Chuck laughed, shaking his head. "I've always believed in giving my kids space to grow. Sure, I'll step in if they need help, but Emily doesn't need me hovering over her. She's got this." Whoopi smirked, clearly enjoying herself. Oh, sure, sure. You say that now, but we all know you'd probably roundhouse kick anyone who dared to give her a bad review, right? The audience roared with laughter, clearly amused by the image of Chuck Norris defending his daughter with his legendary fighting skills. For a brief moment, Chuck's expression shifted. There was a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Perhaps irritation, perhaps disappointment, but it vanished almost instantly. He forced a polite smile and replied, "Whoopi, I may be known for my roundhouse kicks, but I prefer to let my actions speak louder than words. And trust me, my daughter doesn't need me to fight her battles." Despite his measured tone, there was an undercurrent of seriousness in his words that didn't go unnoticed. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, sensing that the joke might have gone too far. Whoopi, however, seemed oblivious, or maybe she simply chose to ignore it. Leaning forward again, she pressed on, her tone lighthearted but tinged with sarcasm. "Come on, Chuck, don't pretend you wouldn't scare off anyone who criticized her work. We all know you're the ultimate dad bodyguard." The laughter from the audience grew louder, though it felt a little strained this time. Backstage, members of the production crew exchanged uneasy glances. One staffer whispered to another, "Do you think she's pushing it too hard?" Another shrugged. "It's Whoopi. She knows what she's doing." Yet, despite their confidence, in her comedic instincts, no one could deny the growing tension in the air. Chuck remained composed, his face betraying little emotion. But those who knew him well could see the subtle signs, the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed lightly against the armrest of his chair. He was holding back, choosing diplomacy over confrontation. For now. Meanwhile, Emily sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had expected some teasing. It came with the territory of being Chuck Norris's daughter, but this felt different. It wasn't just playful banter anymore. It felt like Whoopi was using her platform to undermine her accomplishments, and while Emily tried to stay calm, it was clear that the comments were starting to weigh on her. As the segment continued, Whoopi launched into another joke, this one sharper than the last. "Let's be honest," she said, leaning back in her chair with a smirk. "If your dad weren't the Chuck Norris, would anyone even care about your book?" The room fell silent. Even the usually lively audience seemed unsure how to react. Emily looked down, visibly hurt, while Chuck's expression hardened. For a moment, it seemed like he might walk off the set. But instead, he took a deep breath and prepared to respond, not with anger, but with quiet conviction. The silence in the studio was deafening. For a few seconds, it felt like time had stopped. The audience, who moments ago had been laughing and clapping, now sat frozen, unsure of how to respond. Emily's face flushed red as she stared at her, hands trying to hide the hurt that was clearly written across her features. Chuck Norris, on the other hand, remained still, his posture calm but his eyes sharp like a storm brewing beneath the surface. Whoopi Goldberg leaned back in her chair, seemingly oblivious to the weight of what she had just said. Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, as if she hadn't realized how cutting her words might sound. "Oh, come on," she added with a chuckle, attempting to lighten the mood. "We're just having fun here, right? No harm meant." But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers twisting together nervously. She wanted to say something, to defend herself or her work, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she glanced at her father, hoping he would step in. And he did. Chuck cleared his throat softly, drawing everyone's attention. When he spoke, his voice was steady and measured, but there was an unmistakable firmness to it. "Whoopi," he began, locking eyes with her. "There's a difference between humor and disrespect. My daughter worked tirelessly on that book, not because of me, but because of her passion and talent. If you want to make jokes, fine. But don't dismiss someone's dreams just because you don't understand them." The room seemed to hold its breath. Whoopi blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the seriousness in Chuck's tone. She recovered quickly, though, forcing a laugh and waving her hand dismissively. "Relax, Chuck. It's all in good fun. No, I didn't mean anything by it." But her attempt to brush off the comment only made things worse. The audience, which had been silent up until now, began murmuring among themselves. Some nodded in agreement with Chuck, while others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even the crew backstage could feel the tension mounting. One cameraman whispered to his colleague, "This is getting awkward. Do you think we should cut to commercial?" Before anyone could act, Chuck continued, his voice carrying a quiet intensity that demanded attention. "I've spent my life teaching people the importance of respect for themselves and for others. Humor can be a powerful tool, but when it's used to belittle someone's hard work, it loses its value." Whoopi raised her hands defensively, clearly sensing that she had crossed a line. Okay, point taken," she said, her usual confidence, wavering slightly. "Let's move on, shall we?" She turned toward Emily, flashing a wide smile. "So, Emily, tell us more about your book. What inspired you to write it?" Emily hesitated, her mind racing. She knew this was her chance to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but the sting of Whoopi's earlier remarks still lingered. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to speak. "Well," she started, her voice trembling slightly, "the book is based on my own experiences growing up. I wanted to share a story about resilience and finding strength in difficult times. Writing it was challenging but also healing." Her words were met with polite applause from the audience, though the energy in the room remained subdued. Whoopi nodded enthusiastically, clearly eager to repair the rift she had unintentionally created. "That's wonderful, Emily. Really inspiring stuff. I'm sure your dad must be so proud of you." Chuck gave a small nod, his expression softening slightly as he looked at his daughter. "I am," he said simply, his voice filled with genuine pride. "And I hope people see her work for what it is, her own achievement, not mine." For the rest of the segment, Whoopi tried her best to keep the conversation lighthearted, steering clear of any further jabs. She asked questions about Emily's writing process, her inspirations, and her plans for the future. Emily answered as graciously as she could, though it was obvious she was still shaken. Chuck, meanwhile, maintained his composure, offering brief but supportive comments whenever necessary. When the interview finally wrapped up, the applause from the audience felt less enthusiastic than before. As Chuck and Emily stood to leave the stage, they exchanged a quick glance, a silent understanding passing between them. Neither of them said a word as they walked backstage, but their body language spoke volumes. Emily's shoulders were slumped, and Chuck placed a reassuring hand on her back, guiding her away from the cameras. Backstage, the atmosphere was tense. Members of the production team avoided making eye contact with each other, unsure of how to process what had just happened. One staffer muttered under her breath, "That could have gone better," while another shook his head and replied, "Yeah, but hey, it's live TV, these things happen." Meanwhile, Whoopi sat alone in her chair for a moment, replaying the segment in her mind. She prided herself on being able to read a room, to know where the line was and how far she could push it without crossing it. But tonight she had miscalculated. The look on Emily's face, the way she had shrunk into herself after those careless comments, stayed with Whoopi long after the cameras stopped rolling. As the show went to commercial break, Whoopi sighed heavily and leaned forward, resting, her elbows on the desk. She glanced over at her producer, who was standing nearby, clipboard in hand. "Did I go too far?" she asked quietly, her usual bravado replaced by uncertainty. The producer hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's hard to say. Some people will think it was just harmless banter, but others might see it differently. Either way, social media is going to blow up over this." Sure enough, within minutes of the segment airing, the internet erupted. Clips of the interview spread like wildfire across platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Viewers weighed in with their opinions, some defending Whoopi and accusing Chuck of being overly sensitive, while others praised him for standing up for his daughter. Hashtags like "Wow, I respect Emily" and "Wow, Chuck Norris stands tall" began trending, sparking heated debates online. Emily, sitting in the green room with her father, scrolled through her phone numbly, reading the flood of messages pouring in. Some were kind, offering words of encouragement and support. Others were harsh, criticizing her for not being able to take a joke. Tears welled up in her eyes as she struggled to process it all. Chuck noticed her distress and gently took the phone from her hands. "Enough," he said firmly but kindly. "You don't need to read every comment. Focus on what matters. Your book, your message. That's what truly counts." Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered. "I just wish none of this had happened." "I know," Chuck replied, pulling her into a hug. "But sometimes, challenges like this remind us of our strength, and I promise you we'll get through this together." As the night wore on, the fallout from the interview continued to unfold. News outlets picked up the story, analyzing every word of the exchange. Late-night hosts joked about it during their monologues, some siding with Whoopi and others applauding Chuck for setting boundaries. Meanwhile, sales of Emily's novel skyrocketed, propelled by the controversy. Bookstores reported a surge in orders, and readers flocked to leave glowing reviews, praising her courage and talent. Despite the chaos swirling around them, Chuck and Emily found solace in each other's company. They returned to their hotel room, exhausted but determined to rise above the negativity. As they sat together, watching the city lights twinkle outside their window, Chuck broke the silence. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with fists. They're fought with words and with love." Emily smiled faintly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I guess I'm learning that the hard way," she admitted. "You're stronger than you think," Chuck assured her, "and no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." With those words, they ended the day, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to prove themselves. The morning after the interview, the internet was ablaze with discussions about what had happened. Social media platforms were flooded with reactions, opinions, and debates. Some people praised Chuck Norris for standing up to Whoopi Goldberg, calling him a hero for defending his daughter's dignity. Others accused Whoopi of going too far, saying her jokes crossed the line from playful teasing into outright disrespect. Still, there were those who sided with Whoopi, claiming that Chuck was being overly sensitive and that she was just doing her job as a comedian. Emily woke up feeling groggy and overwhelmed. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like a movie she couldn't turn off. She reached for her phone on the bedside table, half expecting it to explode with notifications. Sure enough, hundreds of messages awaited her, some supportive, some critical, and many simply curious. One message stood out. A stranger had written, "Your book sounds amazing. I bought it last night because of everything you've been through. Keep going." It was a small moment of kindness, but it meant the world to Emily. She showed the message to her father, who was sitting at the hotel room's small dining table, sipping coffee while reading the news on his laptop. Chuck smiled when he saw the text. "See," he said, pointing at the screen. "People are rooting for you. This is proof that your voice matters." Emily nodded, though she still felt uneasy. "I just wish none of this had happened," she admitted softly. "All I wanted was to share my story, not become part of someone else's drama." Chuck set down his mug and looked at her seriously. "Life doesn't always go the way we plan," he said. "But sometimes these unexpected moments teach us something valuable. You're learning how to handle criticism, how to stay true to yourself even when others doubt you. That's a skill worth having." Though his words were comforting, Emily couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the controversy overshadowed her actual work. Her novel, Through the Storm, wasn't meant to be a spectacle. It was supposed to inspire and connect with readers. Now, it seemed like everyone was talking about her family name or the argument on live TV, instead of the message she had poured her heart into writing. Meanwhile, Whoopi Goldberg was dealing with her own fallout. Back in her New York apartment, she scrolled through Twitter, watching as hashtags like #JeerRespectEmily trended alongside memes mocking her comments. At first, she tried to laugh it off, telling herself that criticism came with the territory of being a public figure. But as the hours passed, the weight of the backlash began to sink in. Her assistant, Lisa, knocked gently on the door before entering the living room. "Hey, Whoopi," she said cautiously, holding a tablet filled with updates. "Just wanted to check in. How are you holding up? Whoopi sighed, rubbing her temples. Honestly, not great. I didn't mean to hurt anyone's feelings. It was supposed to be harmless fun, you know. But now, I don't know. Maybe I went too far. Lisa sat beside her, offering a sympathetic smile. You're human, Whoopi. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do next. Do you want me to draft an apology statement? Whoopi hesitated, staring out the window at the bustling city below. An apology feels weak, she muttered. Like I'm admitting defeat. But maybe it's the right thing to do. Lisa nodded encouragingly. Sometimes owning up to our mistakes is the strongest move we can make. People will respect you for it. After a long pause, Whoopi finally agreed. Together they crafted a short but sincere message addressing the situation. In it, she acknowledged that her comments may have come across as dismissive and apologized to Emily and Chuck for any harm caused. She ended the statement by expressing admiration for Emily's courage and talent, urging her followers to support her book. When the apology was posted online, reactions were mixed. Some praised Whoopi for taking responsibility, while others dismissed it as insincere damage control. Regardless, the gesture marked a turning point in the narrative. Slowly but surely, the tone of the conversation began to shift, from outrage and division to reflection and understanding. Back at the hotel, Emily and Chuck were preparing to leave for the day when a call came in from their publicist. Good news, the woman said cheerfully. Sales of your book have skyrocketed overnight. Publishers are calling to discuss reprinting copies, and several talk shows have reached out to invite you as a guest. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. Really? Because of all this? Exactly because of all this, the publicist replied. Controversy sells, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. Either way, this could be a huge opportunity for you. Chuck listened silently, his arms crossed as he considered the implications. On one hand, he hated the idea of Emily's success being tied to such a negative experience. On the other hand, he recognized that life rarely unfolded in neat, predictable ways. Sometimes challenges presented opportunities for growth, and this might be one of those times. Later that afternoon, Emily decided to visit a local bookstore where her novel was being prominently displayed near the entrance. Seeing her book on the shelf, a real, tangible object that represented years of hard work, filled her with a sense of pride she hadn't expected. As she stood there, lost in thought, a young woman approached her shyly. Excuse me, the woman said, clutching a copy of Through the Storm. Are you Emily Norris? Emily blinked in surprise. Yes, I am. Hi. I just wanted to say, thank you. The woman continued, her voice trembling slightly. Your book helped me get through a really tough time. And after hearing about what happened on TV last night, well, it made me appreciate your courage even more. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she accepted the compliment. For the first time since the interview, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this storm wasn't entirely destructive. It was also bringing light to places she hadn't anticipated. That evening, Chuck and Emily returned to the hotel, exhausted but reflective. They ordered room service and settled onto the couch to watch a rerun of the talk show episode. Watching it again without the pressure of live cameras and studio lights gave them a fresh perspective. Chuck shook his head slightly, chuckling under his breath. You know, Whoopi's got guts, he remarked. Not many people would dare take shots at me on national television. Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised by his comment. Are you saying you forgive her? I didn't say that, Chuck replied with a grin, but I respect someone who isn't afraid to speak their mind, even if they stumble along the way. His words stayed with Emily as she drifted off to sleep that night. Forgiveness wasn't easy, especially when wounds were still raw, but perhaps in time she could find a way to move forward, not just for herself but for the sake of her work and the message she wanted to share with the world. Unbeknownst to them, Whoopi was grappling with similar thoughts. Sitting alone, in her apartment, she reflected on the power of words, their ability to build bridges or burn them down. She realized that humor, while a gift, carried responsibility. And as much as she loved making people laugh, She vowed to be more mindful of how her jokes landed. By the end of the week, the initial frenzy had begun to die down. Conversations shifted from outrage to curiosity about Emily's book, and invitations poured in for interviews and speaking engagements. Chuck watched proudly as his daughter navigated this new chapter of her life, knowing that she was stronger than she realized. In the midst of chaos, something beautiful had emerged, a reminder that resilience often grows in the most unexpected places. The days following the controversial interview were a whirlwind for Emily Norris. Her life, once quiet and predictable, had been thrust into the spotlight. Bookstores across the country reported a surge in sales of Through the Storm, and readers flooded her social media accounts with messages of support. Some shared how her words had resonated deeply with them, while others expressed gratitude for her courage in sharing her story. Despite the overwhelming attention, Emily found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. Pride in her hard work being recognized, but also frustration that the focus seemed to be on the drama rather than her book's message. Chuck Norris, ever the pillar of strength, stayed by his daughter's side throughout it all. He accompanied her to interviews, book signings, and events, offering quiet encouragement whenever she needed it. Though he rarely spoke publicly about the incident with Whoopi Goldberg, his presence alone was enough to reassure Emily. "You're doing great," he told her one evening after a particularly long day of appearances. "Just keep your head up and stay true to yourself." Emily nodded, though she still felt uncertain. "I just hope people see past the noise and actually read my book," she said softly. "That's all I ever wanted, to connect with people. Through my words." Chuck placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "They will," he assured her. "Not everyone will care about the controversy, and those who do might even pick up your book out of curiosity. Either way, your story has a chance to reach more people now." Meanwhile, Whoopi Goldberg was navigating her own challenges. The backlash from the interview continued to linger, and while her apology had softened some of the criticism, it hadn't erased the damage entirely. Late-night comedians joked about the exchange, and online debates raged on. Some fans defended her, arguing that she was simply doing her job as a comedian, while others accused her of crossing a line. Whoopi spent hours reflecting on what had happened. She replayed the interview in her mind, analyzing every word she had said. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was just harmless banter, a natural part of hosting a talk show. But deep down, she knew better. She had underestimated the impact of her words, dismissing Emily's achievements in a way that came across as dismissive and hurtful. One afternoon, Whoopi decided to visit a local bookstore. It wasn't something she usually did, but she felt drawn to see Emily's novel firsthand. As she browsed the shelves, she spotted Through the Storm prominently displayed near the front of the store. Picking up a copy, she flipped through its pages, reading snippets of Emily's heartfelt prose. The writing was raw and honest, filled with pain, resilience, and hope. For the first time, Whoopi truly understood the depth of Emily's talent and the weight of her own careless remarks. "I messed up," Whoopi muttered to herself as she stood in the aisle, clutching the book. "Big time." Back at home, she reached out to her producer, Lisa, with an idea. "What if I invite Chuck and Emily back onto the show?" she suggested. "Not to rehash the argument, but to apologize properly. Maybe we can turn this negative moment into something positive." Lisa raised an eyebrow, surprised by the suggestion. "Do you think they'd agree after everything that's happened?" Whoopi shrugged, her expression thoughtful. "It's worth a shot. If nothing else, it's the right thing to do." After some deliberation, Lisa helped draft a formal invitation, which was sent to Chuck and Emily's team. To everyone's surprise, they accepted. Both father and daughter agreed that closure might help put the incident behind them and allow Emily to refocus on promoting her book without the shadow of controversy hanging over her. The day of the follow-up episode arrived, and the atmosphere in the studio was tense but hopeful. Crew members whispered among themselves, speculating about how the segment would unfold. Would there be lingering resentment? Or would the trio find a way to reconcile? When the cameras rolled and the red light blinked on, signaling the start of the show, Whoopi greeted the audience warmly before turning her attention to her guests. Chuck and Emily walked onto the stage, both looking composed but slightly reserved. The applause from the audience was polite but subdued, reflecting the mixed feelings many viewers still held about the situation. "Welcome back, Chuck and Emily," Whoopi said, her tone unusually serious. "Thank you for coming here tonight." "Thanks for having us," Chuck replied, his voice steady but measured. Emily gave a small nod, avoiding direct eye contact with Whoopi. Whoopi took a deep breath, clearly nervous but determined to make amends. "Before we dive into anything else, I want to take a moment to address what happened last time you were here. I owe both of you an apology for my comments, for the way I handled things, and for any hurt I caused." The audience fell silent, hanging on her every word. Whoopi leaned forward, her expression sincere. "Emily, your book is incredible. I read it after our last meeting, and it made me realize how much I underestimated you. You're talented, brave, and deserving of every bit of success you've achieved. And Chuck, I respect you so much for standing up for your family. I should have known better than to cross that line, and I'm truly sorry." For a moment, no one spoke. Emily glanced at her father, unsure of how to respond. Chuck gave her a subtle nod, encouraging her to take the lead. Taking a deep breath, Emily finally looked at Whoopi and said, "Thank you for saying that, it means a lot." Whoopi smiled faintly, relief washing over her face. "I mean it," she insisted, "and I hope this gives us a chance to move forward, to focus on the amazing work you're doing instead of the mistakes I made." The audience erupted into applause, breaking the tension that had hung heavy in the air. Chuck added, "We appreciate your honesty, Whoopi. Mistakes happen, and owning up to them takes courage. Let's leave the past where it belongs and look ahead." With that, the tone of the interview shifted dramatically. Whoopi steered the conversation toward Emily's book, asking thoughtful questions about its themes and inspirations. Emily opened up, sharing stories about her journey as a writer and the personal struggles that shaped her work. Her answers were heartfelt and engaging, winning over even the most skeptical viewers. By the end of the segment, the atmosphere in the studio had transformed. The audience cheered enthusiastically, and Emily looked visibly lighter, as though a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Chuck, too, seemed pleased, his earlier guardedness replaced by warmth and pride. As the credits rolled and the cameras turned off, Whoopi approached Chuck and Emily backstage. Extending her hand, she said, "Thank you for giving me another chance. I won't forget this experience or the lesson it taught me." Chuck shook her hand firmly, while Emily offered a small but genuine smile. "Thank you for apologizing," she said. "It takes strength to admit when you're wrong." The three parted ways that night with a newfound sense of mutual respect. For Emily, the experience reinforced the importance of staying true to herself, even in the face of adversity. For Chuck, it was a reminder of the power of forgiveness and grace. And for Whoopi, it was a humbling yet transformative moment that reminded her of the responsibility that came with her platform. In the weeks that followed, Emily's book continued to gain traction, reaching audiences far beyond what she had ever imagined. Readers praised not only her storytelling but also her resilience in overcoming the challenges brought on by the controversy. Book clubs across the country chose Through the Storm as their monthly selection, sparking meaningful discussions about perseverance and self-worth. For Chuck, seeing his daughter thrive despite the obstacles filled him with immense pride. He often reminded her of a simple truth. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every time you do. Emily carried those words with her, using them as fuel to keep pushing forward. As for Whoopi, she returned to her role as a host with renewed purpose. She vowed to approach her guests with greater empathy and respect, ensuring that her humor uplifted rather than diminished. Though the incident remained a blemish on her career, it also became a catalyst for growth, a reminder that even the strongest voices could stumble, but redemption was always possible. By the time the dust settled, the story of Chuck Norris, Emily, and Whoopi had evolved into something unexpected, a tale of accountability, forgiveness, and second chances. It served as a powerful reminder that, in life, mistakes were inevitable, but so was the opportunity to learn, grow, and emerge stronger on the other side. The weeks that followed the second appearance on Whoopi's show marked a turning point for everyone involved. For Emily Norris, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The controversy had brought her book unprecedented attention, but now, with the apology and reconciliation behind her, she could focus on what truly mattered: connecting with readers. Bookstores hosted signings where fans lined up eagerly to meet her, many clutching dog-eared copies of Through the Storm. Some shared their personal stories, telling Emily how her words had inspired them during difficult times. Others simply thanked her for being brave enough to share her journey. At one event, a young woman approached Emily with tears in her eyes. "Your book saved me," she said softly. "I was going through something similar to what you wrote about, and reading your story made me feel like I wasn't alone." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat as she hugged the woman. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had written the book in the first place. Not for fame or recognition, but to offer hope to those who needed it most. Her father, Chuck, watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. He knew how much effort Emily had poured into her work, and seeing her impact firsthand was deeply rewarding. Chuck himself had become a quiet advocate for his daughter's success. While he avoided the spotlight whenever possible, he often accompanied Emily to events offering support and encouragement. People frequently approached him to express admiration for how he had handled the situation with Whoopi Goldberg. "You stood up for your family," one fan told him at a book signing. "That's real strength." Chuck smiled humbly, shaking his head. "It's not about standing up for myself," he replied. "It's about protecting what matters most: family, values, and respect. Anyone would do the same." Despite the positive momentum, Emily still faced challenges. The internet never forgot, and occasional trolls would leave harsh comments on her social media posts. At first, these remarks stung, but over time, Emily learned to brush them off. She focused instead on the overwhelmingly supportive messages from readers who appreciated her honesty and vulnerability. Writing had always been her way of processing pain, and now it was helping others heal too. Meanwhile, Whoopi Goldberg worked tirelessly to rebuild trust with her audience. After the heartfelt apology and the follow-up episode with Chuck and Emily, viewers began to see her in a different light. Many praised her for owning her mistake and using it as an opportunity to grow. Late-night hosts joked about the incident, less frequently, and when they did, it was often in a light-hearted, forgiving tone. Whoopi also made subtle changes to her hosting style. She became more mindful of her jokes, ensuring they were playful without crossing into disrespect. During interviews, she took extra care to highlight her guests' achievements, rather than overshadowing them with quips. One guest, a young musician, promoting his debut album, later thanked her publicly for making him feel valued and respected during their conversation. "Whoopi has always been great at what she does," Lisa, her assistant, remarked one day. "But lately she's been even better. More thoughtful, more intentional." Whoopi nodded, reflecting on her journey. "Sometimes you don't realize how much power your words have until they hurt someone," she said quietly. "This whole experience taught me to slow down and think before I speak, not just on the show but in life." As the months passed, the bond between Chuck, Emily, and Whoopi evolved in unexpected ways. Though they weren't close friends, there was a mutual understanding between them, a shared acknowledgement of the lessons they had all learned. Whoopi occasionally sent notes of encouragement to Emily, congratulating her on milestones like hitting the bestseller list or receiving glowing reviews. Emily, in turn, expressed gratitude for Whoopi's efforts to make amends. One evening, Chuck received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten by Whoopi, thanking him for his grace and patience during the ordeal. "You reminded me of the importance of humility and integrity," she wrote. "I'll carry those lessons with me forever." Chuck read the letter aloud to Emily, who smiled softly. "She really means it," Emily said, "and I think we should let go of any lingering resentment. Holding on to anger doesn't help anyone." Chuck agreed, folding the letter carefully and placing it back in its envelope. "Forgiveness is powerful," he said. It frees us from the past so we can move forward. By the end of the year, Emily's novel had achieved remarkable success. Critics hailed it as a poignant exploration of resilience and hope, while readers continued to rave about its emotional depth. Publishers approached her with offers for future projects, eager to support her growing career as an author. Emily accepted cautiously, reminding herself to stay grounded despite the whirlwind of attention. For Chuck, watching his daughter flourish filled him with immense satisfaction. He had always believed in her potential, but seeing her thrive under pressure reaffirmed his faith in her strength. "You've come so far," he told her one evening as they sat together in his living room. "I'm proud of the person you've become." Emily grinned, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Thanks, Dad, I couldn't have done it without you." Their relationship had grown stronger through the experience, forged by shared adversity and triumph. Chuck often reminded Emily of the values he had instilled in her since childhood: perseverance, kindness, and authenticity. These principles guided her as she navigated the complexities of her newfound fame. As for Whoopi, she emerged from the incident with a renewed sense of purpose. Her career continued to thrive, bolstered by a fresh wave of goodwill from fans and colleagues alike. She remained committed to using her platform responsibly, championing causes that aligned with her beliefs and amplifying voices that deserved to be heard. In a surprising twist, Emily and Whoopi eventually collaborated on a charitable project. Inspired by Emily's advocacy for mental health awareness, Whoopi invited her to co-host a fundraising gala aimed at supporting organizations that provided resources for struggling families. The event was a resounding success, raising significant funds and drawing attention to an important cause. On stage during the gala, Whoopi introduced Emily with genuine admiration. "This incredible woman has shown us all what it means to turn challenges into opportunities," she said, earning enthusiastic applause from the crowd. Emily stepped forward, smiling warmly, and delivered a speech that left many in tears. "We all face storms in our lives," Emily began, her voice steady and heartfelt. "But it's how we respond to them that defines us. Through kindness, forgiveness, and determination, we can weather anything, and maybe even inspire others along the way." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, encapsulating the spirit of resilience that had carried her through the past year. When the event concluded, Chuck pulled Emily aside, his eyes shining with emotion. "That was beautiful," he said. "You've touched so many lives tonight." Emily hugged him tightly, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Despite everything she had endured, the teasing, the criticism, the chaos, she had emerged, stronger and more determined than ever. And she knew she wasn't alone. Her family, her readers, and even unexpected allies like Whoopi had helped her along the way. In the end, the story of Chuck Norris, Emily, and Whoopi was about more than a single misstep or a heated exchange. It was about accountability, growth, and the power of forgiveness. It reminded people that mistakes were inevitable, but redemption was always within reach, if one was willing to take responsibility and strive for change. Years later, when asked about the incident, Emily would smile and say, "It shaped me in ways I never expected. It taught me to stand firm in my truth, to embrace kindness, and to believe in the goodness of others, even when it's hard." And Chuck? He would simply nod, adding, "Life throws punches sometimes, but true strength isn't about fighting back, it's about rising above." As for Whoopi, she carried the memory of that chapter as a reminder of her humanity. "We're all works in progress," she once said during an interview. "What matters is that we learn, we grow, and we keep moving forward, together." And together they had turned a moment of conflict into a legacy of hope, proving that even in the toughest storms, light could shine through.